Hey guys, Jake Carlson here, host of the Modern Leadership Podcast. Are you ready to focus on amplifying your leadership superpowers? Let's go! Good morning, my friends and fellow elite achievers. Welcome back to another value-packed episode of Modern Leadership. This week, I want to talk about change, and not just any change. Let's talk about the fast-paced, seemingly constant hyper-change we experience every day as leaders. Today, I've invited an expert in change to join us for a conversation about calibrating our leadership style to deal with this hyperactive change. Eric Wright is the president of publishing at SCB Marketing. He is an innovative leader, a dynamic speaker, and a published author. He has taught leadership and management on 4 continents, served on various economic development and visioning councils, and authored hundreds of articles, including 3 books. His new book, Dogs Don't Bark at Parked Cars, Your GPS in an Era of Hyper Change, is a motivational guide for success in continually changing business environment that transcends generations and professions. Eric, welcome to Modern Leadership. How are you this morning?
It's great to be with you, Jake. I'm excited to engage in this conversation. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have such a great background and so much to talk about. But before we jump into all of that, what did we miss by way of intro?
Oh, I don't think a thing. The current company that I'm involved with, we have been publishing business journals in the Florida market now for 12 years, which has given us a great opportunity to interface with and learn from really some of the most fascinating entrepreneur and business leaders in the country. And so a lot of what I'll be sharing has been gleaned from their life lessons and their experiences. So let's get to it.
Yeah, absolutely. When you talk about the business journals, now is this a weekly, monthly publication that goes out and where you interview a bunch of companies and talk about kind of how they were built, what their challenges are, how they're overcoming them?
We have 2 publications that are published monthly. One is called I-4 Business. If you're familiar with the geography of Central Florida, the state is bisected by the I-4 corridor. Some people call it the I-4 high-tech corridor. And so we publish a journal called I-4 Business that covers, that geographic sector of the state. We started with a publication called Space Coast Business. I live on the Space Coast where both manned spaceflight as well as unmanned spaceflight sort of has its home. And that's where we got started. It's an interesting area. We talked about it a little bit, Jake, in our pre-call prep time. And so we also published something called Florida TREP, Florida Entrepreneur, sort of abbreviation for that. And what that covers is more the startup community, the second stage businesses throughout the state that are really the driver for economic development and job growth. As you probably know, it's the entrepreneurial businesses that usually move the needle in terms of job creation and economic upticks within a state. And so with that journal, which we used to publish quarterly. Now it's an online journal. We celebrate, tell their stories, share their experiences for everybody else that's in the quest.
Well, I'm literally excited to jump into this because it's obvious that you've talked to a number of people. You've seen a lot of businesses struggle. You've seen them grow. You've seen a lot of success. And so let's talk about this book. So at some point you realize there's this information that needs to get out there. I'm going to sit down and write this book. So you write Dogs Don't Bark. Tell me about that, how you got the idea, and what the name, what's it about?
Well, the name actually came from an experience that my business partner, Jeff Pearsall, had when he was a young kid. Grew up in rural Florida, and there was literally, sort of the junkyard dog that lived in somebody's front yard, and nobody would go down that. They were afraid to ride their bicycles down that street. And after a while, he just decided that he was going to challenge this dog, got out a big head of steam, rode down the street, and sure enough, this dog came out after him, and he was actually beating the dog. He was outrunning this dog, which was his goal. Yeah, exactly. You know what that's like when you're 9 or 10 years old. But then he paused to look back, and he went to kick at the dog. And when he kicked at the dog, he missed, and the dog caught him right on the bum, And so it was this whole idea that if you allow yourself to pause, to pay attention to the barking dogs, to the distractions, to those who, feel like their call in life is to discourage you in your pursuit, you're going to get bit on the bum. The idea is to keep focus on where you want to go and what you want to do. So that was sort of the storyline that became the basis of this Dogs Don't Bark at Parked Cars. But the other thing we realized, Jake, was we have literally talked to hundreds and hundreds of very successful CEOs, very successful entrepreneurs, from startups to Fortune 500 companies, and we began to recognize a pattern. We saw that there were certain things that they did in their personal life as well as in their company culture and practice that was common to almost all of them. And we began to say, if we could communicate these sort of core values, it would be invaluable in this era that we're living in, where things are changing so fast. It's very difficult to know how to navigate that change. And the conclusion we came to was you can't control the change. The change is going to happen. What you have to do. It's
inevitable.
Yeah, you have to have something on the inside, a set of values, a paradigm on what you want to do and where you want to go that's not changing. And that's the only way you're going to be able to navigate this thing successfully, which I'm sure you have done and realized as well.
Well, and as I thought about the title of this book, one of the things that I was thinking is that, when you are a leader, when you're an entrepreneur and you're out there shaking things up, you're out there part of the change and creating some of that change, there's going to be naysayers. There's going to be those who doubt you, those who are just trying to discourage you. And to me, that's this barking dog. And if you're just sitting on your front porch sipping iced tea, nobody's barking at you. Nobody's trying to cause any ruffles with you. But when you're out there changing the world, when you're an entrepreneur, people are going to be out there trying to discourage you. It's just an inevitability. And so as I look at being a leader in this world right now, where there's so much change, and when you're out there trying to challenge the status quo, well, how do we deal with kind of these barking dogs?
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. I tell people there's a reason they called it Fulton's Folly, and it wasn't because they believed that Fulton was going to change transportation forever. They didn't think it was possible. They thought it was a crazy idea, this idea of putting a steam engine on a wooden boat. And that happens. It almost is without exception. You can just go through sometimes, you look up the quotes of those who were naysayers, from Thomas Edison to Goddard. Goddard came out before World War II and said they're going to put bombs on top of missiles, and the most brilliant scientist at the time came back and said that'll never happen. It's like heavier than air flight. They really believed that was a physical impossibility. The greatest minds of the era thought it was a physical impossibility. And so you run up against that. And that's why it's so important that you have clarity of vision, that you have an internal core that says, hey, I believe that this is possible, and I'm going to drive it as hard as I can, come what may. Otherwise, you'll never succeed. And you see that, from the Wright brothers to Steve Jobs, just this passion that, hey, we can do this. We can make, a small computer that everyone can use. We can make a device that people can carry around in their pockets and get information from. And they've changed the world as a result of it.
Well, let's dive into that a little bit, because I agree with you. I mean, it takes the Wright brothers, dogged determination that they're going to be successful in spite of all failure to go out there and create flight. Or Steve Jobs, as you talked about. How do we as entrepreneurs, how do we as leaders create that passion within ourselves? Because you're absolutely right. We need it. We have to have it if we're going to succeed, because there is so many obstacles, particularly when you're trying to change the world, when you're trying to do something that is so far outside the norm. How do we create that passion within us?
There's a couple of things, Jake. The first is, I think you have to have a really clear vision of what you want to do. We talked about this when before the interview call. I live in an area that was founded on two basic visions. One was John F. Kennedy, to put a man on the moon and safely return him. The other was Walt Disney, who said it's kind of fun to do the impossible. And because of the magnitude of that vision, and because of their ability to draw the people to that vision who could bring it about, it became a reality. And so I think you got two things there. One is you have to passionately believe in what you want to do and that it's possible. The other thing you have to do is you have to be extremely proactive in attracting others to that vision, i.e., you have to be able to articulate the vision. You have to articulate it sensibly and repeatedly so that other people begin to buy into it, because few visions are ever realized as a solo act. Most of the time it is a team effort. So you've got to begin to think of, who else do I have to bring in? Who else do I have to evangelize in this vision that I have in order to turn this vision into reality?
And I want to add a third one for you, because in modern leadership, we talk often about the CIA of influence, and influence being leadership and the ability to get your followers, get the people that you're leading to do the things that need to be done and want to do them. And we talk about conviction. That's that internal passion. That's what you talked about. You have to have this internal passion. The second one then is irresistibility. That's what you talked about, as being able to really inspire your followers externally, get other people involved in your vision and your dream, and have them support you in your efforts. But then the third one that I've often found is true, particularly as an entrepreneur when you're out there in the world. And this is the A for accountability, or the grit. I mean, when you're a leader, you can have all the passion that you want in your heart, and you can be as charismatic and really sell the dream all you want, but you're going to face challenges. There's going to be times when you're going to try to kick the dog and you're going to get bit in the bum. And that's when accountability or grit really comes in. And that's just powering through and working hard and continuing to really go after your dream.
I couldn't agree with you more. The first chapter in our book is What the Dog Whispered, which is about the foundation of trust. And trust this is something Stephen Covey said, trust is made up of two components. One is integrity and character, and the other is ability or skills. And in order for people to trust you, you got to have both those things. And if you fall down on either side of that continuum, you're going to lose trust. And when you lose trust, everything begins to slow down. People's buy-in immediately starts eroding if it doesn't evaporate altogether. And so this point that you make about accountability is paramount. Once people question your integrity, once people question your character and motivations, things are going to very quickly begin to derail or at least slow down. You look at like the banking crisis that happened about a decade ago, and all of that was really a breakdown in character. And the result of that, all of these regulations were implemented. And what was the result of all those regulations being implemented? Everything began to slow down. The pace of deals began to slow down. You experience it every time you go to the airport. What used to be a 15-minute process of getting on a plane now is a 1 to 2 hour process. Why is that? It's because trust is broken down because of the terrorist attacks. And so whenever trust breaks down, things are going to slow down. You are going to run into problems.
And so as leaders, we're developing trust within our businesses and with our followers. And of course, trust easier to build or easy to destroy once you have it. How do we build this trust? What do we need to do as leaders to have this trust amongst our followers?
Well, I tell you, there's a number of things you can do. The first of all, you have to set reasonable expectations for yourself and your deliverables. If someone is going to trust me, I have to be honest about my capabilities, about the pace at which I can deliver on. Because if I say, hey, look, I'll have that for you in a week, or I'll have that for you by end of business today, I don't deliver on that because I am not able to. There are other forces that are preventing me from doing that. Trust erodes. If, on the other hand, I say, hey, I'll get that to you as soon as I can. I'll get back with you by the end of business today to let you know how we're moving along pace-wise. I'm hoping that I can get it to you by the end of the week, but you can be assured that I'll communicate with you every day so that we have realistic expectations. When you do that, people have a tendency to trust you much more than if you say, hey, I'm gonna deliver the moon when you can't even get out of Earth's orbit. I think the other thing is it's just consistency. That seems so simple, but I trust my brakes because every time I press on my brake pedal, they work. If I press on my brake pedal and nothing happens, immediately, I go into, a crisis mode. Well, the same thing is true with us. If we are just consistent in what we say and what we do, people are going to gain trust in us. We have an earned reliability, I call it. Just like we have in our brakes or just like we have in our car or anything else. The same thing is true in human relationships. I think another one is just don't change the rules. What I say I'm going to do with one person, make sure I do that with other people. And then everyone has confidence in me. I mean, I could beat the greatest chess master in the world right now if I was just able to alter the rules of chess, but I can't do that and authentically win. So in our business engagement, we have to do the same thing. We just can't change the rules. We got to exercise just honesty and humility, and trust goes up in those kind of environments. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to ask you, so we talked about setting reasonable expectations, continually communicating and keeping people informed. Of course, consistency, which ties into this, don't change the rules. I want to take you back to this setting reasonable expectations and throw a curveball at you. So we're in a hyper-competitive world. As business owners, we're constantly facing new challengers, old challengers, competition from up the street, competition from down the street. And oftentimes, I believe this is where some of our inconsistency or some of our setting unreasonable expectations comes in. And that is, we want to appear better than the competition. So how do we remain competitive as we basically set expectations of saying, this is what we can deliver, and the response from our client or potential customer is, well, then I can just go up to the road where they're promising me the moon.
Right. Slow on the front end, quick on the back end. It takes time to build trust, and we can never allow our client to set the expectation that we have because our client doesn't understand our business. Our client does not understand our processes. We have to set the expectation. Now, Jake, how many people have you talked to that took the lowball bid on any kind of project? It can be a construction project, it can be a software development project, developing a website. They took the lowball bid, went to this particular firm that said, hey, we can deliver this in X amount of time. And then, maybe a month later, maybe 2 weeks later, maybe 6 months later, they come back and say, wow, we have just wasted 6 months with this company because they said that they could do it within this time. They said they could do it within this price, and it's been delayed. So you have to start out sometimes slower on the front end and be honest about what you can do, be honest about your capabilities, because then in the back end, the pace of your transaction is going to accelerate because they have confidence both in your product as well as in your integrity. And when you hit that sweet spot of ability and integrity, things begin to move very quickly. There's always going to be somebody who will lowball you on every single deal, either in terms of price or in terms of time. What you have to do is have the integrity to say, wow, that's really great. If they can do that, more power to them. This is what we're able to do.
He asked the question, how often do we hear about people who accepted the low ball and are disappointed? And I believe that, like gravity, it's almost a universal law. I mean, when you accept low quality or, in exchange for not value, when you're trying to get the upper hand in the exchange of value, it's almost universal that you're going to end up disappointed. And when you end up disappointed, we as business owners need to be in it for the long run. We need to be in it for the long term. And that means establishing strong relationships. It means really building a reputation on trust, as you're talking about here. And the only way that we can do that is to set reasonable expectations. The short run win of getting a contract is not going to be more valuable than the long-term relationship that you're going to build through creating this trust through expectations. And so I think that's a really valuable thing to learn as business owners and also to learn as leaders. So as we continue to dive into this book, that's chapter 1, and we're looking at trust. What else do you want to talk about?
Let's talk a little bit about a relational priority. And there's so many aspects of this particular topic, but we live in a world where most business interface or much of business interface, particularly on the retail side, is done through a digital platform. And what our challenge is in dealing with our customers, if we take the priority that, hey, I want to build a relationship with them, and I want to build, as you have described, a relationship that is a marathon, not a sprint. I want them to be, as the old cliche says, customers for life. Then what do I need to do in order to treat them in such a way that I'm communicating to them, look, I value you as a person. I value you in terms of this deal that we're involved in. Conversely, I value the people who are working for me as people. And if you raise that in the culture of your company, you're going to have incredible stickiness. I'll just give you a story, Jake. My wife and I met my son, who lives in Taiwan, and his family in Vietnam in February. And about 4 months out, I went online and I booked our flights to Ho Chi Minh City. And all was well. I got a great deal on the flights. So 2 weeks before we were to leave, I went back on that website in order to book my seats and to confirm everything, as anybody would. Found out that my reservation had been canceled. And they said, oh, we sent you an email. That's what came up online. We sent you an email. I got no email. Well, see, the initial transaction that was done digitally was great and met all my needs. But once I encountered a problem, I wanted to talk to a human being. I couldn't push the customer service button on their website and resolve the issue that was facing me. I mean, in 2 weeks, I had to fly halfway around the world, and I had to be there on a particular day. And now, because my reservation was canceled and they really didn't notify me, it was going to cost me twice as much. So in this digital world we live in, as a business person, you have got to keep your finger on the pulse of what can be handled, through automation, and what can only be handled through human interaction. I mean, and let's take it internally. Let's say I have to let somebody go. Now, if a human interaction is involved in terminating somebody's employment, That's a lot different, wouldn't you say, than them just getting an email saying, I'm sorry, but your employment has been terminated because we're changing direction.
Yeah, there's an incredible difference between both of those. But, as business leaders, we often are trying to become more automated. We're trying to become more digital because, there's a number of reasons, right? Efficiencies, the cost, having less humans in dealing with it. Hopefully we're in our minds, we're thinking that the more automated it is, the less errors we're going to have. So how do we balance this desire to automate, desire to create efficiencies through automation with this still in our current environment where we have to have humans interacting and dealing with some of the problems?
Jake, all I can tell you is it is an art. It's not a science. Nobody at MIT has come up with an algorithm to solve this problem for business. What it requires is some due diligence on the part of every business owner where they have to say, okay, what do I need to do in order to hit the human element in the transaction that I'm involved with? Look, if I can book a flight without having to talk to somebody, I can just go online. I'm leaving here from this location, going here, want to return this time, ding, da, ding, da, ding. If I can do that, that's great. I appreciate that opportunity. But what that company has to do is they have to ask themselves the question, at what point in time does a human interaction need to be involved? And so what we have found is that with certain transactional business, hey, the automated system works absolutely great. But when there's a problem, it's just like an assembly line. When the assembly line breaks down, you need human eyes on it. You need people that have an understanding of how the machinery works and how the whole line flows. And that's the only way that you can resolve it. So I would have to say, Jake, it's more of an art than it is a science, but it is an art that I believe every CEO and every manager has to be attuned to. If they think they can solve every kind of problem and dilemma through more advanced automation, I think they're going to find themselves way behind. It's a balance.
And what I hear you saying is that we need to be intentional. We need to think through our processes. We need to think through our business and identify in the beginning, before we even get started, what needs to be automated and what needs to be human driven, and really put that into place. It can't be just at the spur of the moment or at the time of need. You have to intentionally prepare and plan and be ready for the situations as they come. For example, it's pretty reasonable that an airline should be able to anticipate that there's going to be glitches or errors in the scheduling and reserving process. So knowing that, having somebody on call or the ability to communicate should have been something that they should have anticipated.
Oh, you're absolutely correct. My son works for E-Trade Financial up in Atlanta, and he's really in the recruitment and training side of that business. But there's a classic example where they created this platform where people can go online and trade and buy stocks and bonds and just a plethora of financial products. But they also recognize that almost immediately people would want to talk to someone in order to reinforce the decisions they're making and give them confidence. I mean, that's what leadership is really about. It's giving people relational confidence. And to your point, Jake, which is very astute, in advance you have to examine the type of business you have and the platforms that you're using. But the other thing you have to have your ear tuned to is your customers are going to give you invaluable feedback. They will tell you about their frustrations. They will tell you when they need human interface. And so it's this balance of anticipation, building it into your system, while at the same time having your ear tuned to hear the feedback that they are giving you, this invaluable, intel that they'll give you for free about how your system is working, which unfortunately some people can turn a deaf ear to.
And I love this idea of intentional, invaluable feedback. And the reason, I do a lot of this surveying, not just written surveys, but actually getting on the phone and calling my clients, calling my customers, and really finding out what's working for them and what's not working. Because the reality is, in business, you've got the dogs that always bark. You've got those that always have a complaint. And you have those that always love what you're doing. But what about this middle group, this silent group that either loves what you're doing or has been disappointed in what you're doing? And I don't know if you've had any interaction since, I assume so, with this airline, but here we are online. Obviously, we haven't talked about what the airline company is, but here we are talking negatively about basically a whole industry. I mean, I've done a lot of flying, and this is not unique just to you and that one experience. And this is what's happening within our businesses. When we let somebody down, they may not come to us and bark at us, but they might go online or they might go on Twitter and bark at us a little bit. And so we need to be intentional about going after that feedback and really keeping our finger on the pulse of what's going on within our business.
I'm just sitting here nodding my head, through this whole thing. As you said, you've got a certain percentage, and let's say it's 5 to 10% on the one end that are just raving fans. You've got 5 to 10% on the other end that no matter what you do, they're going to find fault in it. And then you've got this huge group in the middle, and that's your target. And those are the people that you have to be catering your business to. You can't cater to those two extremes, or you're going to be out of business, or you're never going to be able to scale your business. And so they're the ones you have to look at and recognize that the people got a lot of power now. They have power that they didn't have before. One person can do a video that can go viral, and suddenly the only context people have for your brand is this viral video that is mocking your product or your customer service. So it's vitally important that you attune yourself to it and you listen to it and you get that feedback and you respond as you should.
This has been a fascinating conversation, Eric, and I love diving into this. I agree with you 100% that we are in an environment of hyper change, and we as leaders need to be conscious of it. We need to be prepared for it, and we need to be proactive and intentional about our response to it. Now, before I let you go, one of our favorite parts of the podcast is a subject or a section that we call Learning from Leaders. It's where we add a little personal to go along with this business conversation. A couple quick questions about what you're reading and a little bit about what you enjoy. Are you ready for learning from leaders?
Yeah, I feel like this is Final Jeopardy.
All right, for $500. Book currently on your Kindle or bedside table.
Oh, great. It's actually the Mindset Scorecard by Dan Sullivan. I don't know if you're familiar with Dan. He leads Strategic Coach. It's a simple little book. It's a 1-hour read, but I'm reading it over and over again. And, basically what he says is you've got a mindset, and the people that you will be most successful at doing business with are people that share your mindset. So the better you understand your mindset, the more you'll recognize it in others, and the more success you're going to have moving forward, which, I thought was absolutely powerful. And so I'm working through that on a daily basis.
Yeah, Dan Sullivan is one of the masters out there. And one of the things you said, a short read, I made me kind of chuckle. I bought a book this last week. It was 30 pages and it cost me $18. And you would think, boy, why are you paying $18 for 30 pages? Would I have been happier if he would have put 270 pages of fluff in it and sold it to me for $18? Get to the point.
Yeah, it's what is my value takeaway? And let's face it, with most books, it's like one or two things that are transformational to us. If we get that, man, it's worth the $15. It's worth $100 or $1,000 if we just get that one thing that we can apply to our life.
I couldn't agree more. All right, how about your leadership superpower?
I would say that is understanding how other people are wired and trying and working to make sure that they are in their sweet spot within our organization, rather than saying, okay, this is the need that I have and I want you to fulfill it, really trying to understand them and then position them sort of on my team like a coach to say, if I put Tom Brady as a defensive lineman, you're going to fail and we're going to fail. If you're a Tom Brady, I want you taking snaps, and I'll get a Dominican Sue, to be a defensive lineman. So I would say that is what I focus on more than anything.
Yeah, and if we were to put it in the words of Jim Collins, get the right people in the right seats on the bus as you're taking this journey.
Right.
All right. How about a motivational quote, philosophy, or mantra that you live by?
Abraham Lincoln once said, "I get ready, and perhaps my chance will come." It's funny. I was talking to the general that oversees Cape Canaveral, and he said, "Luck is not luck if you're not prepared for it." And it goes back to the statement that Lincoln said, I got myself ready, and when opportunity presented myself, I was able to seize that opportunity. If we're not prepared, opportunity, is not opportunity.
You don't see it. You don't notice it. It goes right past you.
Or you're crying because you realize that you missed an opportunity because you didn't get ready.
And we often talk about this on the podcast where we talk about being a surfer. And are you standing on the beach watching the big waves, or are you out there in the impact zone getting beat up? But that's where you catch waves. I mean, that's where you get the ride of your life. All right, our last question. The book that you most often gift to your friends, families, or colleagues?
Oh, wow. Now that's a tough one because, I probably, like you, have read so many books, but I really had to think about that and recognize the book that I've given more than any other. And it's probably Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, because I found so many people are confused about what, faith is all about and how to integrate faith into their life. And that book was a great source of clarification to me. And I've probably given that one away more than any other.
And we are whole beings, meaning that, our spiritual life, our physical life, our financial life, all of that is wrapped into who we are. It's how we lead. It's how we present to the world. So I appreciate that recommendation. Before we let you go, Eric, how can we find out more about you and pick up a copy of Dogs Don't Bark at Parked Cars?
Well, if you go to Amazon.com, you can just type in Dogs Don't Bark at Parked Cars, and you can get yourself a copy of the book. We certainly hope that you will do so. Or you can go to our website, Dogs Don't Bark at Parked Cars. We are completely revamping that website right now, but that is another tool that you can use to get to me.
Wonderful. Well, we're going to link all of that up on the show notes, so they can just go over to the show notes, click on those links, pick up a copy, and find out more about you. Eric, I can't thank you enough for spending this time with us. What a fascinating conversation. You're absolutely right. The world is hyper change. There's so much out there. We need to be proactive and ready for it. Thank you for being a guest on Modern Leadership.
Thank you, Jake. I've enjoyed it.
Well, what a fascinating conversation. Really appreciate Eric Wright coming on the podcast and talking to us about change. I mean, it's inevitable, right? I mean, it's out there. We see it with the technological advances that we have. It is happening around us, and we can either jump in and just go with it, learn, and really use the change, the innovations that are in our lives to our advantage, or we're going to get run over by them. And so I love this idea of parked cars are not barked at by dogs, or dogs don't bark at parked cars. If you're not out there stirring things up as a leader, if you're not out there making a difference in your community, in your business, and with your followers, boy, nobody's going to care. The dogs are not going to bark at you because you're not really progressing. You're not really doing anything. You're no threat to them, and you're no threat to your competitors. And so go out there and be a change agent. Go out there and build trust with your followers. Grab a copy of the book. Of course, everything that we talked about can be found on the show notes for this week's episode, which are found at jakeacarlson.com/ML79 for episode 79. And until next week, I want to wish you the very best of days, an even better life, and of course, stay awesome. Thanks for listening to the Modern Leadership Podcast. You can find me on Facebook at Speaker Jake, on Twitter at Jake A. Carlson, and of course the website, jakeacarlson.com. See you there.